I actually had quite a bit of fun going back and reviewing some older games that are part of my long expanded library of games. So, why don't we do it again? How about this one? Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer here to share with you another one of my 3TG retro game reviews. This time I'll be sharing my thoughts on the what I consider to be underrated installment in the somewhat expanded Final Fantasy VII compilation of series lore games, with this one going by the name of simply Final Fantasy Dirge of Cerberus. Now, this one very much stands out, and a lot of people don't talk about it all that much, but I just felt it'd be nice to kind of go back and just share my initial thoughts on it. So if you do happen to enjoy this review by the end, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep track of me in all my future videos, and make sure if you guys have any more ideas for future videos you'd like me to see uploaded, over the near future, make sure you let me know in the comments down below. So without wasting any more time, let's get started with talking about the story for Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus. The 1997 original Final Fantasy VII game is without question the single most important video game I've ever played. It established JRPGs as my favorite genre of games, as well as making me a gamer who holds a strong importance on plot, making me a story-driven gamer, and helped jumpstart my passion for the gaming industry as a whole. It's not an exaggeration that without this game I probably never would have created the YouTube channel I have now, and not even gone down the life path that I continue to follow to this day. Out of every entry in the legendary Final Fantasy franchise, Final Fantasy VII is without question the most recognized and has had the most amount of time dedicating to fleshing out this franchise's story across the most amount of media sources in the forms of Final Fantasy VII's Before Crisis, Crisis Core, the animated short film Last Order, the original 1997 game, the CGI film Advent Children and Advent Children Complete, to this installment that we will be talking about today in the form of 2005's action shooter Dirge of Cerberus. I always thought it was very interesting that out of all of the main party games, that it was Vincent Valentine that would end up getting his own standalone entry in the Final Fantasy VII series. I mean, out of all the main characters, he's actually the only character that you can actually miss. Like, the first time I had even heard about Vincent Valentine was when they were actually showing trailers for the Advent Children CGI film. I mean, when I first saw the trailers and this guy popped up in the red cloak, I was wondering who was that. And my friend said, oh, that's Vincent Valentine. I was like, who's Vincent Valentine? Oh, he's this character that you can actually find or you can actually miss in Final Fantasy VII. And turns out I did happen to miss him. I had every single character but him, so I immediately had to go back, replay the game, and once I got Vincent Valentine, he ended up being probably one of the coolest characters I'd ever seen. So much so that my brother actually went out of his way and gave me, much to his kind heart. Actually, I actually have a figure of Vincent Valentine with play arts, which is pretty high quality. And I do think that there is certainly enough mystery around his character to warrant his own game. And while the game, I think itself, isn't perfect story-wise, there's definitely a lot of bright points, and I'd just like to go over a few of them. The main story for Dirge of Cerberus takes place 3 years after the events of the original game and 1 year after the events of Advent Children. After the fall of Shinra, while Vincent is visiting the city of Calm, it is immediately attacked by an army of soldiers and members of Deep Ground, which is an organization created by the last remnants of Shinra to create genetically enhanced super soldiers. The purpose of this attack was to capture Vincent and retrieve what is known as the proto-materia, which Vincent uses to tap into his chaos powers, and Deep Ground wants to use this materia to awaken a powerful weapon known as Omega. This causes Vincent to think upon his past during his time when he was a member of the Turks, and remember a woman named Lucretia, who not only worked under Dr. Hojo to create Sephiroth, but was the one who injected the Chaos Gene into Vincent, granting him his powers. Seeking answers, Vincent travels back to Nibelheim to find out more answers on exactly how Omega actually works, but he is quickly ambushed and the proto-materia is taken from Vincent, but before he can be killed, his ally Yuffie appears to make the save. Vincent reunites with his allies to discover that Deep Ground's main headquarters is located in the ruins of Midgard, and together launches a main attack on their base in order to prevent Omega Weapon from being turned on and destroying the planet. Now, if you ask me, I think that Final Fantasy Dirge of Cerberus kind of fits into that really strange department of being one of these kind of semi-experimental games that certain franchises like to test out. Now, there are several franchises that are usually known for a certain genre of game, and then when they get really popular, they kind of want to expand and test to see that they could try telling this story in a different sort of format. I mean, don't get me wrong, Final Fantasy is obviously going to be known for JRPGs, but heck, maybe they want to try a third-person shooter. And as far as I can tell, this is the first and only time they actually tried this. And while a lot of people don't have very high praise or have a lot of good things to say about it, I think that for a studio that had been heavily known for just making JRPGs, for a one and only time experiment, I think that they did a pretty solid job. There's definitely some positives and negatives, but overall it's something that I'm actually kind of happy that is a part of my overall video game collection.
Dirge of Cerberus is an action RPG third-person shooter with combat playing out in real time, with the main hub at the top showing Vincent's level along with his health points and magic points, with the display on the bottom showing the current weapon he's using and how much ammunition he has. While targeting enemies, the camera will shift to an over-the-shoulder angle similar to that from Resident Evil 4, but you also have the option to play this game from a first-person's point of view should you choose that. There's a solid amount of platforming that you'll have to have Vincent run and jump around environments as you explore. There's several traditional RPG elements spread throughout the game as well. As you defeat enemies and gain experience points, your level for Vincent will increase with his stats. An important element of the game is the amount of different weapons and weapon customizations that you have access to. Vincent can carry up to 3 different gun frames that allow you 3 different variations of your weapon. Depending on which customizational parts that you equip to your weapon, it affects the unique performance of your weapons. Aspects like weight, fire rate, barrel range, and ammo variation provide a lot of different elements that you will be required to take into account. This weapon system encourages you to experiment and pick the weapon variations that you feel comfortable with in different combat scenarios, whether it will be equipping a loadout for higher fire rate to deal with multiple enemies attacking you at once, or equipping an extended barrel or scope to snipe out enemies at a distance. This for me keeps the game from getting boring and repetitive. Vincent during battle also has access to his limit breaks, which allow him to transform into 2 forms. The first one being the Galian Beast, which enhances Vincent's physical combative feats, and the second being his Chaos form, which grants you the ability of flight and access to his most powerful weapon in the game. There's also a solid collection of different boss fights that you will encounter across the game, which provide different levels of challenges and require different approaches in order to defeat them.
Now, despite how positive I've been so far in this review towards this game has a lot of serious problems that seriously hold it back, which is why I completely understand why a lot of fans who really enjoy the Final Fantasy VII storyline aren't too fond of this game. For starters, this game has some very, very plain and just boring level designs. The enemy variety is also almost barren to the point where it's almost repetitive. You might run into only like 3 or 4 enemies that you can kind of identify, and the same approach will work every single time. Now, the boss fights do stand out, but they're very few and in between. And I would even say that the last boss fight at the end is probably one of the easiest boss fights you will ever encounter. You actually have to try very, very hard to lose that actual final battle. Another problem that this game also has is a lot of the story issues. I think that though this game did a very good job of trying to focus on Vincent, I think that they really didn't include the other members of the Final Fantasy cast very well. Some of them only pop in for like a minute or 2, and so you could kind of remove them and the story wouldn't change. I mean, if you're gonna tell a story about Vincent trying to kind of work alongside his allies, I would have liked to see him actually interact with his allies a little bit more. So I was really disappointed in that sense. And it also doesn't help that this game left off on a cliffhanger that we know would never be resolved. So I don't really know what they were thinking. I think that this was a serious case of them having an idea of where the story could go, but not even knowing exactly if there would be any real success. I think that there should have been a major focus on trying to make the best possible game they could here, and then if it succeeds, then we can continue on with the story. Don't just assume it's going to be a massive success just because it's Final Fantasy VII, but that is another mistake that Square Enix had made, and sadly it has suffered for it.
Despite these flaws, when you look at the overall design department for Dirge of Cerberus, when you take into account that for a developer like Square Enix that had never worked on a shooter game of any kind like this before, some of these elements still hold up. I think that the visuals for a 2005 game still hold up pretty well. The CGI cutscenes may be few and in between, but are still incredible to look at taking the visual style directly from the Advent Children film. The level design in some parts is a bit uninspiring, and some sections are made to seem worse than they actually are. And with the series lacking of creativity in their enemy variety, which can make the game somewhat feel boring at times, this is something that could have a serious effect on some players. The soundtrack music for the most part is average outside of the two primary standout songs that were created specifically for the song, but when those two songs kick in, it is used most effectively to get the most out of this game.
Now, in conclusion, Final Fantasy Dirge of Cerberus, it's not for everybody. I would say even if you're the biggest fan of Final Fantasy, I can't really say that this is something that if you didn't get a chance to play this when it was first released, that you have to absolutely go out of your way to actually find a copy and play. Or if you find some way to play it on an emulator, you could test it out. But I will say that if you are a Final Fantasy VII and you're really curious, there are some bright spots. Now, they've been doing a lot of remakes for the Final Fantasy VII games. Now, I've obviously stated, for those who've been watching my channel know that I'm avoiding the Final Fantasy VII so-called remake. I've already seen what they're doing with Crisis Core and I'm avoiding that. But if by some small chance they ever decided to want to even attempt to remake Dirge of Cerberus and they took advantage of all of the gameplay style innovations for third-person cover-based shooters that have come in the last decade and a half, I really think that a much updated and improved version of Dirge of Cerberus with definitely some improvements in the story could give us a pretty impressive and solid game that, heck, I would happily recommend. But if I had to just rate Final Fantasy VII on PlayStation 2, the original version, if I had to give it a rating, the highest that I could give this is, being nice, a 7 out of 10. It's not great, it's not as awful as some people might say, but it just kind of fits right there in the middle. I'm happy it's part of my collection, but if it's something that you don't have yourself, you know, I can't recommend that you go out and try to find a copy. So that's my review for Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus. If you like my review, please make sure you give this video a thumbs up. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you all next time.